The day Mandela almost faced execution. Picture this. It's June 12, 1964, and I'm standing in the most tense courtroom in South African history. The air is thick with anticipation, fear, and the weight of a decision that could either end the life of Nelson Mandela or alter the course of human history forever. What I'm about to tell you is the story of 5 minutes that nearly erased one of the greatest leaders our world has ever known, and how a single decision in that Pretoria courtroom prevented what could have been decades of devastating civil war. This isn't just history. This is the moment when destiny hung by a thread so thin, it could have snapped with a whisper. Let me take you back to 1964 South Africa, where the Apartheid regime ruled with an iron fist, and the color of your skin determined whether you lived as a human being or something less. Nelson Mandela, the man who would one day become South Africa's first black president, was sitting in a defendant's chair facing charges of sabotage and conspiracy against the state. The courtroom in Pretoria was packed wall to wall with journalists, family members, and government officials, all knowing they were witnessing what many believed would be Mandela's final public appearance. The judge, Quartus de Wet, held absolute power in his hands, and everyone in that room knew that political prisoners like Mandela rarely walked out alive. The apartheid government had been executing terrorists, their word for freedom fighters, with ruthless efficiency, and Mandela was their biggest prize yet. The obstacles facing Mandela were mountainous and seemingly insurmountable. The prosecution had built their case on fabricated evidence, coerced witnesses, and a legal system designed to eliminate any threat to white minority rule. The lead prosecutor was demanding nothing less than death by hanging, arguing that Mandela was too dangerous to live and that executing him would send a clear message to other would-be revolutionaries. But the real obstacle wasn't just the rigged legal system. It was the impossible choice Mandela faced between saving his own life by renouncing his beliefs or maintaining his principles while walking towards certain death. His family pleaded with him to compromise, to say whatever the court wanted to hear, to just survive so he could fight another day. Even his own lawyers were urging him to show remorse, to distance himself from the armed resistance movement, to give the judge any excuse to spare his life. What Mandela wanted in that moment transcended mere survival. He wanted to transform that courtroom into a platform for truth, to use what might be his final words to expose the brutal reality of apartheid to the world. He understood that this trial wasn't just about his fate, but about the future of millions of oppressed South Africans who had no voice in that white-dominated courtroom. Mandela's objective was audacious. He would use his potentially final speech not to beg for mercy, but to justify the armed struggle and explain why he and his comrades had turned to sabotage when peaceful protest had failed for decades. He wanted to speak directly to history, knowing that his words might outlive him and inspire future generations to continue the fight for freedom and equality. But then came the moment that cranked the tension to an unbearable level. As Mandela rose to deliver his statement, knowing full well it could be signing his own death warrant, the prosecution interrupted with an even more aggressive push for execution. New evidence was presented suggesting that Mandela's influence was growing even from prison, making him more dangerous alive than dead. Government officials whispered in the prosecutor's ear, and rumors swirled that the decision to execute had already been made before the trial even began. Mandela's lawyers made one final, desperate plea for him to soften his statement, to show some hint of remorse that might save his life. The tension in that room was suffocating as Mandela looked at his wife Winnie, at his children, at the faces of people who loved him and wanted him to live, knowing that his next words might be his last. Then came the speech that changed everything. Mandela stood tall and delivered words that would echo through history. I have fought against white domination, and I have fought against black domination. I have cherished the ideal of a democratic and free society, in which all persons live together in harmony and with equal opportunities. It is an ideal which I hope to live for and to achieve. But if needs be, it is an ideal for which I am prepared to die." The courtroom fell into absolute silence. You could hear hearts beating, Winnie Mandela's tears, the scratching of journalists' pens. Even the judge seemed stunned by the power and conviction of those words. Mandela had just delivered his own potential eulogy with the dignity and strength of a man who had already made peace with death. Judge Quartus de Wet called for a brief recess, just 5 minutes, to consider the sentence. Those 5 minutes felt like 5 hours. What I learned later was that during this brief recess, several factors converged to create an unexpected miracle. International pressure had been mounting more intensely than the South African government had anticipated, with telegrams flooding in from world leaders, including some surprising voices from Western allies who were beginning to question their support for apartheid. The judge himself seemed shaken by Mandela's speech and the dignity with which he faced death. But perhaps most importantly, government advisors were whispering a chilling calculation. A dead Mandela would become a martyr whose memory could inspire decades of violent uprising, while a imprisoned Mandela might eventually be forgotten or at worst serve as a bargaining chip in future negotiations. The political mathematics of martyrdom suddenly worked in Mandela's favor. When Judge de Wet returned to that courtroom, the words that came out of his mouth changed the trajectory of human history. Life imprisonment, not death, life imprisonment. The reaction was immediate and explosive. Winnie Mandela collapsed in tears of relief. Supporters cheered and sobbed simultaneously, while government officials sat in stunned silence, perhaps not fully comprehending that they had just preserved the life of the man who would one day lead their country. Mandela himself remained remarkably composed, nodding slightly as if he had expected this outcome, though everyone knew he had been prepared to die. In that moment, the future president of a democratic South Africa was sentenced to what everyone assumed would be a living death on Robben Island, not knowing that this imprisonment would transform him into a global icon and ultimately pave the way for peaceful transition to majority rule. What followed was 27 years of imprisonment that, paradoxically, elevated Mandela from a local revolutionary to an international symbol of resistance and reconciliation. His survival allowed for negotiations that prevented the civil war. Many predicted his eventual release sparked a peaceful transition to democracy, and his presidency demonstrated that even the deepest racial wounds could begin to heal through forgiveness rather than revenge. That 5-minute decision in 1964 didn't just save one man's life. It preserved the possibility of a miracle that few thought possible. A nation transforming itself through truth, reconciliation, and the power of moral leadership rather than through the blood and vengeance that had seemed inevitable. The story of those 5 minutes reminds us that history often turns on the smallest moments, the briefest decisions, the courage of individuals who choose principle over survival. If you found this story as powerful as I did, please hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss stories that reveal the hidden moments that shaped our world. Give this video a thumbs up if Mandela's courage inspired you, and share it with friends who need to hear about the power of standing for what's right even when facing impossible odds. What moment in history do you think changed everything? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And let's keep exploring the incredible true stories that prove reality is often more dramatic than fiction.